In today's video, I begin my journey through the Tribunal DLC featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Tribunal was released in late 2002 and was the first expansion for Morrowind. Since beginning my first ever playthrough for this game, I've already become fairly acquainted with how this DLC begins. In fact, the DLC's introduction has become a bit of a sore spot for players. It happens abruptly, often getting the jump on new and unsuspecting players, and it acts as a bit of a workaround for receiving decent armor and copious amounts of gold right off the bat. My personal experience was such, as when it first happened, I was completely clueless and bewildered that an occurrence like that would happen to a player who's literally just started the game. Without further ado, it's time to delve into the Tribunal DLC and its beginning. As soon as the Tribunal expansion is installed, the start of it can be triggered at any point. The player may find themselves needing to rest or sleep after a lengthy adventure or battle. Doing so, there's a chance you'll be interrupted by a creature of some sort, which is usually no issue. However, with the Tribunal installed, there's also a chance that a random assassin will spawn and start attacking you. Lower level players are likely to have more difficulty defeating them. They usually fight with a sword of some kind and occasionally use ranged attacks. The higher your level, the tougher the encounters will start to get. The first few times I fought them as a lowly mage, I was defeated fairly quickly each time, and they were certainly not a force I wanted to reckon with. However, at higher levels, they serve as an unexpected cash cow and nuisance, occasionally still putting up a decent fight. Once you manage to finally best one of the assassins, you get access into their inventory. You learn that they are actually a member of the Dark Brotherhood, which doesn't really have a guild presence here on Vvardenfell. Their light armor set is far superior to most others that you'll come across throughout the game, as well as they can be sold for a decent chunk of change. Even after killing the first one, more assassins can be sent after you while you're attempting to sleep or rest. Hence the early gold exploit that a lot of veteran players find to be an unfortunate representation of the game for new players. Regardless, once the first assassin has been defeated, a journal entry is unlocked and suggests that the player goes and reports the attack to a guard. Approaching a legionnaire in Pelagiad, he immediately opened with dialogue regarding the assassination attempt. He confirms that it was likely the work of the Dark Brotherhood and expresses fear by saying to get away from him. In the end, he states that this does need to get reported and directs me over to Apelles Mattius in Ebonheart. Arriving at the Imperial outpost via boat, Apelles Mattius can be found on the ramparts of the fort. Speaking with him, he casts doubt on my story of being attacked by the Dark Brotherhood, as I'm currently here able to tell the tale. Inquiring further about the occurrence, he says that it's a very bad omen that I've been marked, and he doesn't want to find out by whom. He says that guild activity here on Vvardenfell is very rare, but back on the mainland of Morrowind, their numbers and contracts are steady. Asking further about the mainland, Apelles says that the faction operates out of Mournhold. He says I can feel free to check it out, although it'll likely be my death sentence. Even though the Blight and Dagoth have been eradicated, Mournhold is still weary with receiving visitors from Vvardenfell. Apelles then says that someone by the name of Ascian Rain might be able to help me with transportation over there. Inquiring about Rain, Apelles says that she could be found in the Grand Council chambers. Exiting the conversation and entering inside of the fort, I sought out Ascian Rain and spoke with her.
Oh, Outlander, did you want something?
Asking about transport to Mournhold, she reiterates that it's difficult to secure passage back there and is an irregular request. The mainland is still worried about Blight crossing over, and she asks me for my reason of wanting to head there. I can either divulge the information or tell her that it's none of her business. I choose the former, and she understands the urgency of the matter. She's weary about possibly sending me to my grave, but says that if it's what I really want, she can make it happen. In fact, she remarks that as soon as this conversation is over, I'll be teleported there right away. She gives me the name of the contact in the so-called Royal Palace who can send me back over to Vvardenfell. With that, I tell her goodbye and am immediately sent over to a completely foreign place. I see the Argonian she told me to speak with, as well as a royal guard. I take a look at the map and unfortunately, it still displays me being at Ebonheart, and I don't get to see a world view of the mainland. I wander to the upstairs region of this reception area and speak with a guard on patrol.
Justice never sleeps.
Asking him about the Dark Brotherhood, he says that he doesn't trust me and isn't comfortable talking about it. I increase his disposition to 40 and try again. This time, he says he's unsure why I would want to go looking for them, but remarks that others have said they live in the sewers beneath somewhere called the Great Bazaar. I ask about this spot, and he says it's on the eastern side of town. With that, thus ends the quest. Dark Brotherhood attacks. Returning back downstairs, I exited the reception area of the royal palace and ended up in the courtyard. This section was beautiful. It felt very calm and serene. The ambience was amazing and the foliage was like eye candy. One thing about Vvardenfell, which is obviously intentional, is that it feels like a dreary and gloomy place a lot of the time. It was refreshing to see a new upbeat version of this game. From the courtyard, I went through a great gate that led to a zone called Plaza Brindisi Dorum. This area was magnificent and so open. It had multiple gateways leading to other sections of the city, and right in the middle, there was a rather peculiar sculpture. Getting in closer, it depicts a battle between Almalexia and Mehrunes Dagon. I don't really know the lore there, but it was certainly a marvelous statue. Something really neat too about Mournhold is that the civilians and guards make different remarks at the player than what you'd hear back on Vvardenfell. Eventually, I found the gateway leading into the Great Bazaar and entered on through. The Great Bazaar contains several booths, establishments, and even a stage of some sorts. I knew that there likely had to be a lot of life and new quests that were one conversation away, so it was really hard to stay on task with searching for the sewer entrance. I stopped by a few merchants though in order to check out some of their wares and to get a lay of the land. Ungaleb at the magic shop had a handful of useful potions for sale, and I decided to indulge in a few. Eventually, I resumed my task and traced the sewer canals on the edge of the district, soon finding a hatch that led down into the bazaar sewers. The sewers were dimly lit, but rather open and spacious. Wandering in a bit, I began to come across some enemies, the first of which was a skeleton. Since completing the main quest line, I acquired the much needed boots of blinding speed, and ever since then, my experience playing this game has changed. My character is no longer annoyingly slow, and if anything, is almost too fast for my own good. Even whilst toggling no sprint, my character is still faster walking than he was while running before the boots were equipped. On the subject of walking, I made a second game-altering discovery that, while doing so, it has no effect on my fatigue. And in fact, my fatigue regenerates while I'm walking. I had actually already known that, but the fact that I was still fairly fast while moving felt kind of like a cheat code. So, not only was my movement speed still better than before, I, in theory, now never had to worry about my fatigue being depleted before a battle. That reminds me of another point I wanted to bring up for this playthrough of Morrowind. Magic has, for better or for worse, become a very secondary feature to my character, at least in terms of combat. Ever since I acquired the Daedric Spear and received the boots of blinding speed, it's become a lot easier to take down enemies with this skill, and it's been nice not needing to rest every time in between fights or needing to pop numerous potions. The Great Bazaar sewers themselves aren't very lengthy. There are multiple twists and meandering pathways, but ultimately, there are two different ways in which you can go that will lead you to the Manor District. The Manor District is where you start to get warmer in your search, as the enemies encountered here are Dark Brotherhood members. Right off the bat, I noticed that they have different ranks associated with them. Some are apprentices, others journeymen, and a few operators. My wandering brought me over to a lookout point with some stronghold entrances just beneath. I attracted the attention of more than a few assassins and was worried at first that I'd get overwhelmed. I was relieved to see though that we were separated by a narrow bridge and held them there as a choke point. Once all of them were defeated, I made a point to grab all of their lightest gear as I could carry a lot of it and could still be sold for a pretty penny. Making my way down to the bottom section, there were two entrances leading to two different strongholds. The first one I went into was the east building of Morrow Manor. Here, I fought a couple more assassins and explored the halls. This area wasn't very vast and both pathways led to dead ends. Exiting the east building, I then made my way inside of the north building. There continued to be assassins at every turn, but it really puts into perspective just how far my character has come from only being able to duel one at a time, and ultimately it being a toss-up to whether or not I survived. At one point, the fighting got pretty hairy, and I had to leave the building in order to rest up. This triggered my character to increase to level 17, and it was interesting putting more points into combat-focused attributes rather than magicka-focused ones. Entering back inside of the north building, I dealt with the remaining fighters and continued onwards. Just beyond an old metal door, an assassin with no helmet came running in at me. His weapon was rather unique too, and I figured that this had to be a leader of sorts. Plus, with every hit from my spear, his health was hardly going down. In fact, our first fight, he paralyzed and poisoned me, then drained my health completely with some powerful blows. The second attempt, I hit him with 2 casts of my second strongest frost spell and put some work in on him with the spear. I utilized the staggering and flinching it caused, as well as made sure to back up as much as possible in order to avoid paralysis. It only worked so long, however, as eventually he had me pinned to the spot with my health depleting rapidly. I counteracted it with some health potions, which, thankfully, helped me survive long enough in order to flee the building. Outside, I continued to heal up until I was finally ready to finish the job. With my magicka regenerated, I cast the frost spell on him, which managed to do the trick and finally kill him. As he was dying, Dandris Vulis yelled out, "No, tell my liege I have failed." The building now lay silent, and the answers I so desperately sought were lying right in front of me. Checking his inventory, I took the enchanted weapons, as well as a mysterious Dark Brotherhood contract. Reading it, it said, "The bearer of this document, under special dispensation of the Night Mother, who has entered in a contract in perpetuity with H, is given special dispensation to execute Bard, a Breton recently residing on the island of Vardenfell. In accordance with all laws and traditions, the aforementioned personage will be executed in the name of H in the most expedient manner possible. All services of the Dark Brotherhood are at the disposal of the bearer of this binding and non-disputable document." With the contract on my person, it was now time to return back to the overworld and learn more information. Who was this aforementioned H? What did they want with me, and why did they so urgently want me dead? Who was this liege that Dandris had failed? As a little side tangent, something I thought of while leaving this Dark Brotherhood base was that this game essentially makes you eradicate a whole sector of the guild. In Oblivion, it's sort of a big deal that you eliminate 8 or so members of the Shadenhall Sanctuary, while here, the player literally takes out around 15 of them. Perhaps it's something that might be visited later though. Obviously, the purification is a different subject altogether, but it feels like this little adventure should have set the Morrowind Dark Brotherhood back by a lot. Anyways, I eventually made my way back up to the Great Bazaar and approached the first High Ordinator that I laid eyes on. I had to bring his disposition up to around 40 before getting any answers. Once done so, he said that if I believed that I truly killed their leader, I should speak with someone named Fedris Hlur. Inquiring about Hlur, the High Ordinator told me that he's the chief steward of Almalexia and can be found in the temple reception area. From the Great Bazaar, I wandered over to a gate that led into the temple courtyard. The courtyard space was massive and contained an elaborately grand structure, seemingly the temple within its center. Similar to previous areas within Mournhold, it felt full of life and rather peaceful, like a place that I really wanted to be in. Ascending up the steps, I made my way over to the doors of the temple and entered on inside. Within, I located the chief steward, Fedris Hlur, and began speaking with him. He recognized me as Mournhold's newest arrival and addressed my issues with the Dark Brotherhood. He questions if my survival means that I have potential, or if the Dark Brotherhood just sent their worst assassins after me. Either way, he says that I can be of service to Our Lady. Inquiring about the guild a little further, Fedris says that it's been rumored that kings have used their services in the past, but quickly sweeps that thought under the rug. When asked about said services for Our Lady, he says that Lady Almalexia is always sending High Ordinators and hands out to take care of the petty business within the city. He then finishes with saying there are matters in which him and I should discuss. Now, continuing along with Fedris progresses the storyline further, but there's an alternate pathway that can be taken to get to this point too, which sheds a lot more light on the current state of affairs within Mournhold. I'd call it the scenic route in terms of Mournhold's main questline. Because I spoke with a High Ordinator about the Dark Brotherhood's contract on me, they sent me directly to Fedris. However, if I go and speak with the Royal Guard, they would send me off to speak with another. They direct me over to a man named Tienius de Lydian in the throne room of the royal palace. Seeking out the captain of the guard, it was a little tricky to find him at first, as I was still trying to gather my bearings around the palace. Eventually, I found myself in the throne room and face to face with Tienius himself. With that, thus ends the quest, Hunt the Dark Brotherhood. Approaching and speaking with Tienius, he introduces himself as King Helseth's captain of the guard and asks if this has to do with an official matter. Curious, I inquire about King Helseth, and he tells me that he's the current Duke of Mournhold and the ruler of Morrowind. Digging into the official matter, Tienius repeats himself with his ranking and influences with the king. I'm then prompted to ask for more information, say I'm not interested, or show him the evidence that King Helseth tried to have me killed. It wasn't something that I was able to piece together before this, but I suppose it all makes sense now. Dandris calling out for his liege, the contract signed H, the utmost urgency surrounding my assassination. I decide to present the contract to Tienius in order to see what will happen. Surprisingly, Tienius affirms that this was likely the doing of King Helseth. He insinuates that my Nerevarine status was likely the cause, as the king probably felt threatened. He then says that I have the option to prove myself in the eyes of the monarchy and asks if I'm interested in helping him out with a problem. As mentioned before, this part of the main quest is completely optional and can be skipped over by going straight to Fedris. However, I found it really useful in learning about the power struggles within Mournhold. I ask him to tell me more, and Tienius says there are rumors surrounding the previous King Lethin's death. Some are saying that he did not die a natural death, and I'm asked to speak with the citizens to hear their opinions on the matter. Before accepting to do the task, I ask him if Athen Lethin really did die of natural causes. This comment irritates Tienius, which you'll notice to be a common theme for the next little bit. I close off by telling him that I'm going to take care of it and exit the conversation. I began asking around right away. Some people responded by saying that he was an old man and that he wasn't going to live forever. Others responded by saying that old men die and long live to the new king. I moved around to a lot of different areas, speaking with a lot of different NPCs for the first time. I knew for a fact that a lot of them were one dialogue prompt away from offering me a quest to embark on, so I was trying to be very careful in what I asked them. Perhaps one of the more interesting responses I received was from the Dunmer of Mournhold. They said that there's a chance he died from old age, and that Dunmer lived for a long time, but they also know how to keep their mouths shut. This comment confused me because it sounded like there was more that they wanted to say but wouldn't or shouldn't. Continuing to roam around, a lot of NPCs began responding in an almost irritated manner. They swore their fealty to King Helseth and asked what more they could possibly say beyond that. In fact, it seemed like at this point, that was the main response that I was getting out of everybody. At one point, I checked in my journal to see if I had actually made any progress. My character was jotting down responses, but nothing indicated that I should return back to Tienius in the throne room. This is where the adventure took me to God's Reach. This section of the city was really neat. It was where most of the civilians lived, and there are a lot of interesting establishments beyond mere manors here. Finally, I had run into somebody with a different opinion on King Lethin's death. Some wished him a peaceful rest, but the Dunmer ultimately don't have kings, calling it imperial foolishness. Admittedly, it took me a very long time to realize that the civilians needed to have their dispositions raised in order to hear the juicy gossip. Plenty of failed attempts with other NPCs later, I went over to a High Ordinator and handed him a hefty sum of gold. At long last, he revealed journal entry worthy information. He called King Lethin old, but not that old. He suggests that someone sped up the dying process and that there's actually an article written in something called the Common Tongue about King Helseth, which details that he's poisoned hundreds of people prior to his rule in Mournhold. With this new information, I returned back to Tienius and told him of the rumor. He wonders if maybe Helseth did poison Lethin all along and wants to read this Common Tongue article for himself. He thanks me for my efforts and asks if I can help him find a temple informant. Tienius says there are rumors of discontent within the temple of Almalexia. He asks me to go over there and lightly interrogate some folks to see if this is true, and if instead, they would accept King Helseth as their ruler. I shoot back and ask if King Helseth is a supporter of the temple. Tienius responds in a rather rehearsed manner, saying that the king is a supporter of both the imperial cult and the temple. He cuts the conversation short and inquires again if this is something that I can do. I accept and go on my way. I wander over to the temple courtyard and find someone named Mayra Halas just outside of the temple itself. Speaking with her, I ask if there's discontent within the temple. She says that there definitely is, as there's dissatisfaction everywhere in the world. Moving along, I entered inside of the temple reception area and came across a woman named Granny Varys. Asking her about discontent, she responded similarly to Helseth, but ended up saying that their faith in Almalexia sustains them. I lucked out with the next NPC, as in the infirmary section of the temple, I met with a woman named Galsa Andrano. I asked her the same question, and she responded in quite the lengthy manner. She said that she grows weary of the Tribunal. For so long, they seem to have distanced themselves from the mortal kind, but as of late, Almalexia has begun to walk amongst the people again, which is cause for concern. I'm prompted to either ask about the temple and the king, continue to listen patiently, or bring up Mera Milo and the dissident priests. I choose the middle option, and Galsa continues onwards. Almalexia has apparently become a strict ruler, denouncing and threatening anyone who isn't a completely faithful servant. Galsa says that now, her beliefs in the temple scare her. I slickly slide in the question about the temple and the king, to which she shoots down immediately and says that this was a mistake to discuss such matters with strangers. Disheartened, I threw a good chunk of change her way and repeated the process over again. This time, when posing the question, Galsa answers honestly and says that she believes Helseth murdered Lethen. She called Lethen their true king, and that if Helseth truly tries to take over the people of Mournhold and attempts to be anything more than a figurehead, the temple and Almalexia will strike him down. Returning back to Tienius with the information, he takes these words as a warning that there's likely no truce to be had between the temple and the monarchy. King Helseth plans to be more than Lethen ever was. He thanks me for my efforts and asks if I can help out with possible disloyalty amongst the guards. For the succession of King Helseth, many of the royal guards were replaced. There were some, however, from King Lethen's reign that needed to stay on due to their experience. He wants me to pose as someone trying to enlist in the royal guards, and asks me to speak with those serving in order to scope out those who may be disloyal. I try asking him if there's anyone specific that he has in mind whom I should vet first, but he says that it's my judgment in which is being tested. I tell Tienius that I'll take care of it and begin my search. I start with the guards in the throne room. Drusus Gratus tells me that his family has long served King Helseth and Queen Baranzaya. I have 3 prompts for him: to ask about Lethen, ask about Helseth, or to mention my House Hlaalu connections. All of his responses are brief, professional, and for the most part positive. The next guard I go to is Evo Othreloth. Evo says that they're new to the Royal Guard and haven't really formed much of an opinion on things yet. Evo also answers the questions in a confident and not very suspicious manner. The next guard I went to, however, was Evulin Arano. He seemed irritated with me asking about joining the Royal Guards. He said the old king was a fool but kind to the people. The new king, however, is ambitious, and because of that, needs experienced guards around like Evulin. I ask about King Lethen, and he gives me an honest take on the previous ruler. When I asked about King Helseth, though, Evulin stumbles on his words and poorly attempts to claim his fealty to the ruler. My character made note of that, and I told Tienius what had just happened. Tienius says Evulin isn't that smart to begin with, so it could have been an honest fumble, but asks me to follow up again. This time, I tell Evulin about my connection to House Hlaalu. Evulin gets excited and says that I need to share this information with someone named Aleri Aren, and that I shouldn't mention this at all to Tienius. From here, I follow the lead and seek out Aleri within the guard quarters. Asking about joining the Royal Guards, she says the same sort of rehearsed response I've heard before and stays fairly unopinionated. When I brought up my House Hlaalu connections and Evulin telling me to seek her out, she became very defensive and denied having any knowledge of why he might say such things. She calls it a misunderstanding and that she'll speak with Evulin privately later. Returning back to Tienius, he believes that the two of them are likely working together. He calls Evulin the weaker link of the duo and suggests that I snoop through his belongings to see if I can find any tangible evidence. Returning back to the guard's quarters, I lay eyes on Evulin's bed and personal chest. Secluding myself and about to cast an unlocking spell, I notice something on the ground beneath the bed and behind the trunk. It appeared to be a handwritten note detailing guard rotations and rosters. When the schedules of Milvela Drelin, Evulin Arano, and Aleri Aren are all lined up to be in the throne room together, it was underlined and made to seem rather important. Bringing the letter back to Tienius, he confirms that this is Evulin's handwriting and makes note to change the rotations and schedules of the 3 guards. He He vows to keep a close eye on them and thanks me for my efforts. He then asks for my help in uncovering a conspiracy against King Helseth. The Hlaalu supporters of King Lethen are less accepting of his so-called natural death. They certainly aren't supportive of Helseth's succession, and Tienye suggests that they'd likely want to see another member of House Hlaalu put on the throne. He asks me to search Lethen Manor for any evidence of a conspiracy against the current king. I inquire about any defenses the house may have, and Tienye comes up short with me, saying that if I truly needed such information, I'm likely not the person for the job. I tell him I'll take care of it and exit the conversation. I figured the manor would be in God's reach, so I went straight there and began to case the houses. Eventually, I landed on Lethen Manor and entered inside. In the foyer section of the home, a guard named Anrail stood posted, keeping an eye on things. I wandered into an adjacent room and closed the door behind me. It appeared to be a study of some sorts, and I began reading books as well as looking through every sort of container. There was nothing here, so I ascended to the second level next. This area had more rooms and another NPC roaming around, keeping watch. I broke into as many chests as possible, again, not finding anything of use for this mission. I then entered into a room containing the widowed Ravani Lethen. She was riddled with anger and sadness, cursing the Imperials for not taking any action against Helseth and his trusted advisors. She too believes in what she read with the common tongue, connecting the dots of Helseth's affinity for poison and Lethen's untimely death. Just behind Ravani, on a dresser, was a handwritten letter, addressed outside, "To my honorable cousin, Forvin Barano, be this delivered in haste. Forvin, I cannot agree. I am a merchant and have no skill at arms. You are a noble and in your prime were proven on practice and tournament grounds. Though, in truth, you have never fought a duel and have few gifts as a liar. No one can doubt Hlaagar the Bloody's aptitude and enthusiasm for mayhem, but he is not a subtle man, more suited for a brawl or battlefield than an assassin's role, and we cannot trust the Dark Brotherhood. Helseth owns them. They promise discretion, but their promises are worthless. I'm afraid we must approach the Morag Tom. I agree with you, they'll probably refuse, but at least they can be trusted to be discreet. If, in the end, we're forced to choose among ourselves, I fear it must be you, and we'll have to rack our brains for some plausible pretext that you'll get into Helseth's presence. I am disappointed though, not surprised, at lack of public outcry for Athen's murder. The popular sentiment seems to be to avoid personal risk and accept Helseth. It's short-sighted but understandable. I have noted, however, that the writer of the Common Tongue is sympathetic to our cause, clever and eloquent. He may be able to sway opinion. We should try to identify this fellow and try to bring him our counsels. Your faithful servant, Bedel Allen. I tried everything in my power to not be seen while taking this note, but nothing really worked. So I was forced to steal it in front of Ravani, making hopefully a temporary enemy out of King Lethen's royal subjects and family. I brought the letter back to Tienye, and he calls out the men mentioned within it. He draws up execution writs and asks me to take care of the rest in the name of the king. Accepting, I ask for specifics on each traitor and then set off. The first one is Forvin Barano. Tienye calls him out as a faithful temple goer, and wouldn't you believe it, I found Forvin in the temple courtyard and accosted him. I brought up the evidence of conspiracy and he outright denied the claims. I had the options of denouncing and executing him or warning him and telling him to escape. I was looking for a little bit of a fight, so I chose the former. His facade quickly unraveled, calling me a lackey to the tyrant of Helseth, and that he'd show me how a real Hlaalu noble acts. A few prods and pokes with my spear, and Forvin was defeated. The next person of interest was Hlaagar the Bloody. Tienye said that he was likely too cheap to pay for lodging, so I'd probably find him in the sewers. Going over to God's Reach and submerging into the residential sewers, I came across a brand new yet familiar enemy type. Some goblins aggroed onto me and a fight broke out. They're handled a little bit different in this game than they are in Oblivion. If they land a hit, they deal incredible amounts of damage, and the ones with shields are great at blocking attacks. The silver lining to the goblins, at least for my case, is that with the Daedric Spear, they don't take very many hits to kill. Eventually, I found myself within the west sewers and meandering my way through a cave. Pretty soon, I came across a Nord clad in steel armor.
Someone should teach you some manners.
Approaching, it turned out to be Hlaagar. I accused him of the conspiracy against King Helseth, and he didn't deny it. He only asked what I was going to do about it. I chose to denounce and execute him, causing another fight to break out. This one was certainly a little more tough. He fought with an enchanted warhammer, and honestly, the fight came down to the wire. Due to my spear's reach, I was lucky enough to be the one dealing the final blow, and all that was left was to find the third person. Beidel Allen, the final one involved in the conspiracy, was a difficult man to locate. Tienius had no clue where he could have been, so I took matters into my own hands and asked a High Ordinator. He called Beidel a bookworm and said to try a bookstore. I remembered seeing one in the Great Bazaar and went straight there. Right off the bat, I didn't see anybody inside besides the merchant. Funnily enough, when asked about Beidel, Sinasso the vendor told me to try a bookstore. This was when I noticed though that there was an upstairs section to the establishment. Ascending the stairs, I laid eyes on and finally found Beidel. Confronting him with the conspiracy, he became distressed and asked to have mercy. I denounced him and got ready for the execution. With a few casts of magic, Beidel was dead and I could return back to Tienius to tell him of my deeds. I brought up the evidence of conspiracy and he thanked me for executing all 3 men, rewarding me with 3,000 gold. Tienius then asks me for my help in finding the anonymous writer of the common tongue. He'd like me to find this person and persuade them into stop writing quote-unquote lies about King Helseth. Every time the guard makes an inquiry, the people assure them that they have no idea who could be behind the articles. I press Tienius' buttons by calling out Helseth as a poisoner and that they aren't really lies. I quickly get worried though that I've gone too far with Tienius, as he becomes aggressive and very pointed with his words. The topic quickly closes out and luckily I'm able to restart it and progress the conversation. He suggests that I try those who place gold above honor first, and makes an ironic comment about wanting to keep free speech alive whilst I enforce the writer to go quiet. Taking the job, I exit the royal palace and immediately head straight for a sellsword whom I found in the courtyard. He says that he doesn't know the identity of the writer, calling it one of life's little mysteries. Even after throwing gold his way, his response doesn't change, so I move on. A lot of other NPCs tell me things like they outright can't help me, they don't know who he is as that's the point of the anonymity, I shouldn't be looking for someone who doesn't want to be found, etc. Finally, I try my luck again with a High Ordinator and they divulge a much needed clue. They try looking at the pawnbrokers as they deal in shady goods and might sell stuff such as scrolls and books as well. I pay a visit to the pawnbroker within the Great Bazaar, 10 Tongues Weirhat, and grease him up with some septims. He tells me that the person I'm looking for is named Trels Varus. The catch, however, is that there's no one in Mournhold who knows of him or his location. Trels is very well hidden, but 10 Tongues tells me that I should look around in the Craftsman Hall, as that's where the tip originated from. Making my way over to God's Reach and entering inside of it, I ask around amongst the craftsmen, but none of them can tell me anything about Trels Varus. Scoping out the building and searching for any further leads, I came across a rather strange locked door titled Keep Out. Unlocking it by a spell, the other side contained a trap door leading down into some sort of secret office. Descending the ladder, I came face to face with 4 discreet and nervous individuals. This room contained papers, inkwells, and most importantly, articles of the common tongue. Speaking with some of the Murren here, they all told me that I should talk directly with Varus. Locating the elusive Trels Varus, he asked me what I was doing here and said that I must answer clearly, otherwise they may be forced to kill me. I have 4 prompts to work with. Tell him to stop printing lies about the king, tell him I'm a burglar looking for treasure, tell him I'm in search of the Eye of Argonia, or that I'll keep this place a secret and I wish to leave with no trouble. I decide to be honest and double down by demanding that he stop writing fibs about the king. He says that he hasn't written any lies about Helseth, and that the common tongue is dedicated to spreading the truth. He asks how I plan to make him stop. I can either threaten to kill him, gift him 1,000 gold, or pledge to donate 3,000 gold to the Widows and Orphans Fund. Choosing the last option, he admits that free speech is what holds the common tongue together, but understands how useful the donation would be for those in need. He agrees to my terms and says he will no longer write about King Helseth, and that now the team has to relocate to a new secret hideout. The 3,000 gold is removed from my inventory, and I run along back to Tienius to inform him of my work. He summarizes my story back to me and asks to confirm if I gave up the 3,000 gold. I'm prompted to either tell him yes, and that I'd like to be reimbursed for it, or that it was a necessary sacrifice for the king. I mention that I expect my expenses to be covered, and Tienius thanks me for my efforts, gifting me a total of 8,000 gold. He then asks one final favor of me, to go and speak with Lady Baranzaya. Exiting the conversation, I wandered through the royal palace in search of the queen's quarters. Wandering into the Imperial Cult Services section, I located Baranzaya's chambers and entered inside. Coming face to face with the lady herself, she says that she's been wanting to speak with me, and knows of the duties I've been carrying out for the king. She follows up by saying that there are other matters I should look into as well. Inquiring about them, Baranzaya summarizes the state of affairs within Mournhold. The monarchy led by Helseth and the tribunal directed by Almalexia are slowly growing more tense with one another. She directs me over to the previously mentioned Fedris Lur within the temple in hopes that I may learn more about him and the tribunal. I asked her who I can trust in these deceptive and dangerous times. She says that she can always answer my questions and that a friend of hers, Platinius Marrow, is very knowledgeable and forthcoming with many subjects. Before parting, she tells me that there's more to Fedris than one might think. There are rumors that he used to be an assassin, and his current position within the temple leaves him with lots of power. Exiting the conversation, thus ends the Royal Palace optional quests. As mentioned before, these set of quests are rather short and, in the grand scheme of things, might seem rather irrelevant to the final plot. But they're actually incredibly helpful for acquainting the player with the city of Mournhold, the political powers at play, and its recent history and dynamics. Resuming my previous conversation with Fedris in the temple reception area, I asked him about Almalexia. He confirms my suspicion that Almalexia is actually present within the High Temple, similar to how Vivek oversaw and resided within the Temple of Vivek. Inquiring about the matters that were up for discussion, Fedris suggests that I could have already met with King Helseth. He calls him a foul man unworthy to sit on the throne. He shares his concerns with me in regards to some new recruits in which Helseth has been training. Going further with this topic, Fedris reveals that King Helseth is in fact raising an army of goblins. He calls this act unnecessary as Mournhold is well guarded by High Ordinators on the outside and by Lady Almalexia on the inside. Asking about the goblin army, Fedris calls them nasty vicious creatures, and that it makes sense why someone such as Helseth would want them as soldiers. I'm to ask around amongst the locals as to where the training grounds for the creatures could be. Once I've found it, I'm tasked with killing all of the war chiefs present, as well as their alleged high elf trainers. Fedris warns me that the goblins can vary in size and strength, and that they're often accompanied by menacing creatures called Durzogs. Exiting the conversation, I left the temple reception area and spoke with the first NPC I saw.
It's another perfect day in Mournhold,
Merahalis. Inquiring about goblins, she said that there were rumors of creatures beneath the sewers of Godsreach, however, isn't sure if they're goblins or not. I suppose I can confirm this theory as I literally witnessed and fought against them myself. I restocked on supplies and repaired my weapons and armor before venturing out. Descending back down into the sewers, the bodies of the goblins I had slain prior were still splayed out on the floor. From the residential area, I made my way into the west sewers and began journeying through unmarked territory. This time, traveling the opposite way from where I found Hlaugar, I immediately ran into a Durzog and different variations of goblin enemies. These ones were more brutish, but didn't hit as hard as their weapon-wielding kin. The Durzog, on the other hand, was a fairly formidable foe. It was really quick, had beefy health, and the ability to take decent chunks out of me. The boots of blinding speed really came in handy here. By activating my sprint, I sacrificed fatigue for being able to thrust really quickly and then leaping out just as fast. The nice part about killing the goblin handlers was that each one held a bargain health potion in their inventory. These potions really came in clutch as the journey progressed. Continuing through the west sewers, I battled against more goblins before finally arriving outside of a new zone called the battlefield. Within the battlefield, I came across another variation of goblin. This one was built like the handlers, but was able to cast spells. Dealing with it and venturing further into the cave system, I came across an enormous open area. One of the doors there led to a zone called City Gate. City Gate was a narrow passageway that served as a connection area to various different points. One of these points was titled the Residential Ruins, and was secured by a level 100 lock. Using a spell to open it, the Residential Ruins led back to a sewer-type area where the fighting resumed. The nice part about these ruins though is that they served as a connecting point between the two zones in which I needed to get to. In fact, the back of the ruins held the stronghold in which the two Altmer trainers were residing in. Entering inside of the Terran Hall East building, I immediately ran into a wall of goblins and durzogs. I found this part to be particularly tricky, as my main way of handling these fights is by maneuvering around a big area. Without anywhere to back up to or anywhere to move at all, the goblin forces pinned me down and killed me more than a few times. On one run, I got lucky in that upon entering inside of the building, there was only one goblin waiting for me on the other side. I quickly killed it and attracted the attention of another. Before the cycle could repeat itself, I moved the fight into a different area of the building, crossing my fingers that we wouldn't be happened across. Thankfully, the coast was clear and I was able to progress further into the stronghold. After taking care of a few loose stragglers, I finally laid eyes on the Altmer trainers. Just barely turning the corner and gaining line of sight with one of them, he aggroed onto me and rushed in. I cast 2 fire spells and cut him down with my spear before the fight could turn against me. Healing up, I repeated the process with the other trainer, and upon his death, received a journal update. Now, all that was left was to locate and kill the goblin warchiefs. In order to get to them, I backtracked through the residential ruins and came across a previous crossroads of sorts. This time, taking the pathway that leads upwards on the local map, I ended up outside of an area called the Tears of Amunshe. Upon going inside, I immediately attracted the attention of a hulking, angry, magicka-casting goblin. I figured due to its aesthetic and size, it had to be a warchief. I got in close and utilized stagger and stun with my spear in order to get some repeated hits in. It had a lot of health, and if I let it get the jump on me, it was able to beat me down pretty good. Shortly into the battle, I found a way to take advantage of the situation. Just above the tunnel I had walked out from was a small ledge. Because of where it was located and the warchief's proximity to me, it was unable to reach me or let off an attack. I traced its movements for a bit before letting off some fire spells. Finally, with a third or so cast, Warchief Kurog was killed, and I only needed to locate one more. It didn't take me very long to do so though. Wandering through the tunnels, I happened across the second warchief and lured it back into the tight spaces. I was relieved to see it get caught on a corner whilst going through its running animations. This allowed me to cheese the fight and ultimately prod it to death with my spear without taking any damage. Once Warchief Durgok was defeated, I received a journal update that I could return back to Fedris. Durgok had a key on him which allowed me to access his chest. He had a hefty sum of gold, as well as an enchanted item called a Goblin Buckler. Finally, it was time to leave the sewers, although I knew there was going to be trouble on the way out. I had rested so many times whilst down here that I knew for a fact all of the goblins I had previously killed respawned back in. So I ultimately decided to use the boots of blinding speed to the best of their ability, by dodging and weaving my way out of the sewers. I honestly had a lot of fun doing this. It was kind of thrilling to know that if I made any mistake at all, I would be instantly beaten down and killed. Soon, I found the ladder leading back up to God's Reach and took a breath of relief. Returning back to Fedris, he asked me what the status on the Goblin army was. He was surprised to hear that I had taken care of all 4 targets and admitted to underestimating my abilities. He swears not to do it again and gives me 15,000 gold for my efforts, thus ending the quest, the Goblin Army. Resuming the conversation with Fedris, he asks if I wish to be of further service to Our Lady. Asking about it, he says that he personally doesn't have any new tasks at this time, but mentions the Lord Arcanon, Gavis Drin, might. Entering into the office section of the temple, I located Drin and began speaking with him. He said that the task laid out for me was of the utmost importance, and that if I were to fail, it would be very displeasing to the Lady Almalexia. Inquiring about the job, Drin says that there's a large sewer system beneath the temple. Within the ruins of Old Mournhold, there lies a corrupted shrine. Asking about the shrine, he calls it the Shrine of the Dead. It was once a place of great power, allowing the faithful to speak with their ancestors. As of late though, it's been neglected and a source of evil has gathered there. Drin says that the shrine must be cleansed, but not by me. I'm to escort Urvel Dolny, one of Almalexia's chosen, down into the depths. The shrine is apparently guarded by a group called the Profane. They're powerful liches who harness the power of the shrine. Drin stresses that Urvel is the only one who can do this cleansing, and all is failed if he dies. Exiting the conversation, Urvel is conveniently standing right behind us. Talking with him, he seems rather nervous and apprehensive with what lies ahead. He outright says that the shrine frightens him, but understands that he has a duty to Almalexia. I tell him to follow me, and together we embark on the journey. Descending to the temple's basement, I located the trap door leading further down into the sewers below. Right off the bat, I encountered some bone lords and rats. This had me relieved on the fronts that the enemies we'd be fighting were mostly undead and that Urvel can actually defend himself. I wasn't going to let him take on too many enemies at once, but it was nice to know that he seemed like a capable fighter. Something I began to catch on to with the Tribunal DLC was that more than likely, most of the action was going to take place within Mournhold's sewers. This made sense as there wasn't actually a way to leave or explore the greater areas beyond the city's limits. It seemed as though for now, the peaceful interactions would happen topside and the violent discoveries would occur below. Together, Urvel and I continued along the path until we arrived at a new zone called the Temple Sewers East. Just on the other side of its doors, a random powerful hostile dark elf lay dormant, waiting for us to appear. He cast a spell which flew past me and I pressed in for the attack. His ability to heal mid-battle was impeccable, as any damage dealt with my spear seemed to be recovered quickly. At one point, I turned around to check on Urvel, only to see that he's long been dead. The initial spell that the Dark Elf cast must have been intended for him, and likely killed him at the start of the battle. I reverted my save and tried the fight again, this time telling Urvel to wait on the other side of the gate. I charged in with my spear, only to have him quickly regenerate his health back mid-fight. I then equipped and cast my most powerful destruction spell, which, thankfully, killed him instantly. Urvel and I continued along through the sewers, fighting more petty and weak undead. The whole time, I was trying my best to take aggro and lead so Urvel would stay alive. Things went smoothly, and the two of us entered inside of a zone called the Temple Gardens. The gardens held more lower tiers of undead enemies, and before we knew it, Urvel and I were standing at a door leading to the temple shrine. I decided that I didn't want him in there while I was taking on the profane acolytes. So I told him to wait out here and entered in alone. I encountered one right away within the shrine area. It looked sort of similar in appearance to a bone lord, but took on more of a humanoid form. I was able to get up in its face and hit it repeatedly with my spear. It was defeated, and I brought Urvel in here to have him close by, but not too close. Through an old metal door leading into the next room, I encountered two more profane acolytes, and this time they showed me just how powerful they were. One of them summoned a greater bone walker, and their lightning attacks kept landing, draining my health rapidly. I popped some health potions and decided to be cautious with the preceding battle. I used the power of my boots to stay agile, dodging as many lightning casts as I could and getting in quickly to hit them with my spear. Eventually, the two of them were defeated, and just a little further, the final two acolytes were wandering about. They aggroed onto me, and unfortunately, I wasn't as careful with dueling them. My health drained to a pretty low amount, and I popped some more health potions to counteract it. This next play I was pretty proud of though. I was able to get right up close with my spear and dodge every single one of their lightning casts. It went so well that before I knew it, both of them were defeated and the shrine was now clear. I returned back to Urvel and escorted him up to the altar in the center of the room. Getting within its proximity, Urvel announced he was going to start the cleansing. He walked up to the altar, some light was produced, and I received a journal update. Together, the two of us retraced our steps back out into the sewers, and luckily, I didn't do a whole lot of resting here, so none of the slain enemies respawned back in. We ascended back up into the basement of the temple and returned to the Arcanon's office. Speaking with Gavis, he asked if I had taken care of the shrine yet. I let him know that Urvel and I were successful, and Drin tells me that the goddess is pleased with my efforts. As a reward, he hands me the blessed spear, which is actually perfect for my needs. The Blessed Spear is an enchanted ebony spear and has the constant effect of shield for 30 points and fortify spear skill for 10 points. With that, thus ends the quest, the Shrine of the Dead. Asking Gavis Drin about being of service to Almalexia, he directs me back over to Phaedrus. Phaedrus, thinking for a bit, comes up with a way in which I can aid the temple. Earlier that day, Almalexia asked Phaedrus to retrieve a powerful artifact called Barlazar's Mazed Band. The band is located beneath the temple. In the northwestern section, I'll find the abandoned crypt, which was previously blocked off by some rocks. He says that if I really wish to know more about it, I should go and speak with Gavis. Entertaining the idea, Gavis doesn't elaborate too much further. He does mention a little bit about Barlazar and that he was once a very powerful mage. The band was crafted in the Second Era and hasn't been seen since. He's ultimately unsure of what it's used for though. Quickly leaving the temple, I paid a visit to Darren in the Great Bazaar. Dropping off some of my items and getting others repaired, I then returned back to the Holy Ground and descended to the basement. Taking the hatch leading down into the temple sewers, I was immediately met by a pair of Bone Lords, but certainly nothing that I couldn't handle. Last time, I didn't really venture too far into this section of the sewers, so I followed the map to the crossroads section and went left, wondering if it would lead me to the northwest entrance. The only enemies that I needed to face here were simple spirits and the odd skeleton, so for the most part smooth sailing. Eventually, I arrived at a rocky area. I assumed this to be the entrance into the abandoned crypt, as it seemed like the rocks were once covering the door. Luckily, the nameplate confirmed my suspicion, and I was one step closer to finding the band. In this zone, I came across more profane acolytes. For the most part, they used the same attacks as the ones from the temple shrine. Their shock spells were easy enough to dodge, and even when they hit, felt weaker than before. There were also some rats scattered around, which only made it a nuisance for the rest and heal method. Also throughout the zone, there were a lot of ladders leading deeper into the abandoned crypt. I wasn't sure if these were sections I needed to go into or not, so I decided to just further explore this zone. Coming across a few more profane acolytes, as well as rats, I soon wandered into a little nook that contained a unique NPC. Getting in close, it turned out to be the legendary Barlazar himself, but in the form of a lich. He warned me that the mazed band must not leave the tomb, as it will destroy the hearts and minds of mortals. He says it should have never existed to begin with, and that it's his burden to bear for the rest of eternity. At the end, Barlazar says that any who challenge him will pay with their life, and the fight begins. I cast my most powerful shock spell on him, which lowers his health by a good bit. I was then able to lunge in with my spear and repeatedly thrust at him. His attacks were really easy to predict, he moved fairly slowly, and his health dropped really quickly. Before I knew it, Barlazar was dead and I was able to retrieve his band. I noticed too that he had a Daedric Claymore in his inventory, and I wanted it really bad. So I made a bit of a gear swap with him, and it just barely fit with my weight capacity. Soon, I'd like to experiment and branch off to another weapon type. Claymores and two-handed weapons are definitely up there as prospects. Both items in hand, I exited the sewers, rested up in the infirmary, and decided to bring the claymore back to the old stomping ground. I spoke with Efteh in the Royal Palace reception area, and he sent me back to Vardenfell. I know I've only been away from it for a couple of real-life hours, but for some reason it felt surreal and almost nostalgic coming back to it. The one thing I didn't miss was needing to use external services in order to quickly travel to different parts of the island. Obviously, the bigger space is more elaborate and immersive for gameplay, but in Mournhold, it's nice to be able to run and get to your desired location in a matter of seconds. I dropped off my claymore in Caius' home, reminiscing of the old skooma addict. It is really interesting and kind of comical that he only played a small part in my journey to becoming Nerevarine. Yet, his impact and lasting impression left on my character feels like he was there all the way up until the end. Returning back to Mournhold and ultimately Phaedrus, he says that he won't take the ring and directs me over to Gavis. Gavis is ecstatic that the band has been found and says that Almalexia will want it immediately. He tells me that I'm the one who needs to bring it to her. I was actually really excited to get to speak with the quote-unquote goddess. First, getting to meet Vivek and then Almalexia. Now all I need is to meet with Helseth. Entering inside of the High Chapel, I see the lady herself, surrounded by a bunch of High Ordinators. Definitely a different scene than when first speaking with Vivek.
What may I do for you, my child?
Almalexia welcomes me to her chapel and says she's heard a lot about me. She appears to almost call me Lord Nerevar, but doesn't venture that far. She appreciates the services I've been doing for her and wishes to discuss Barlazar's mazed band. She's fascinated by it, saying that there's more to the ring than meets the eye. Almalexia says the ring needs to be reawakened, and I'm given the options of 2 prompts. One is to hand it over, no questions asked, and the other is to question why she wants the ring. Out of intrigue, I choose the latter, and Almalexia responds by saying that I shouldn't concern myself with that. The ring will be used to serve the temple in Morrowind. Before dismissal, she bestows the blessing of her light upon me. Out of curiosity, I asked about Helseth, and she gives me the same response that Vivek gave in regards to the rest of the Tribunal. She hasn't really been in contact with him, but is sure he's doing well. Almalexia's blessing turns out to be an incredibly powerful one. It restores 25 points to all 8 attributes. With that, thus ends the quest, Barlazar's Mazed Band. Exiting the High Chapel and returning to Fedris, I asked if there was anything else I could do for the temple. He said to check back in a bit, as there was nothing at the current moment. So far, I'm really enjoying my experience playing through this expansion. I find Mournhold to be incredibly charming, and I actually like how there isn't too much of it to explore. I think I feel this way mainly because there's still so much for me to do and see back on Vvardenfell. Not to mention, I still have the whole island of Solstheim to look into as well. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed the story and the whole setup for things to come. It felt like there was some crazy foreshadowing going on with Barlazar, claiming the ring to be a source of evil. I'm assuming it was originally hidden away for a reason, and I'm really excited to see how everything plays out. From here, it took me a while to realize that the preceding events occur after a 24-hour period. So, forcing a wait, I went and spoke with the nearest High Ordinator. He was hysterical in telling me that the city was under attack. Enchanted machines, as he calls them, have flooded into Plaza Brindisi-Doram and are killing everyone there. Spear in hand, I rushed over and laid eyes on the attacker. The palace guards and ordinators were defending the zone well, but these creatures were abundant. They looked half monster, half machine. It was hard to get hits in, as Mournhold's defense was all over the place. Guards were constantly wandering in front of me, strafing, dodging, and lunging in for the attack. Luckily though, these abominations were pretty weak and didn't hit for a lot of health. I didn't know if there was a power difference between the scorpion-looking ones and the dinosaur-looking ones, but given their size and build, I assumed the scorpions were slightly tougher. Soon, all of the creatures were defeated, and I learned that they were called Fabricants. The verminous Fabricants, or dinosaur-looking ones, carried an elixir that fortifies speed for 10 points for 10 seconds. I took as many as I could in case I would need them in a hairy situation. I noticed too that the statue of Almalexia and Mehrunes Dagon was completely broken and destroyed. Definitely an act of war against Mournhold. Speaking to another High Ordinator, they said that this should be reported to Fedris immediately. Fedris said it's good that I came to him and says that he sent some Ordinators to deal with the rest of the situation. He then says that there's another way in which I could help the city. Similar to Hunt the Dark Brotherhood, depending on whom you speak with, you'll either get sent to Fedris or to Tienius. I decided to go with the Royal Palace Guard for this one, as I felt like I wanted to experience more of this world through them. With that, thus ends the quest, an attack on Mournhold. Speaking with Tienius, he says the same piece of dialogue as Fedris, and I inquired about how I could be of further assistance. Tienius asks me to investigate the disturbance. The attacks likely originated from a Dwemer ruin that sits deep beneath Mournhold. Coincidentally, a passageway down into the ruin was created after the attack, and the entrance sits in the rubble of the memorial statue. I'm to report back if these creatures were Dwemer in origin and exactly where they came from. Going back to Plaza Brindisidorum, I went up to the memorial and descended down into the ruins of Bombs Amschend. It brought me to a natural tunnel, and at the other side of it was an overlook into the Hearthfire Hall. I could hear the sounds of battle all the way from the ladder, and upon closer inspection, it appears as though the fabricants were fighting against Dwemer machines. It was cool to see the Dwemer Centurions in action. The Spheres and Steam Centurions were battling against the hulking and verminous fabricants. Technically, as soon as I witnessed the scene, I got a journal update saying that I could now leave and report back to Tienius. My curiosity got the better of me though, and I stayed to watch the battle through. This eventually backfired as one of the Centurions from below targeted and killed me. Rewatching the fight over, I waited until a winner emerged and then hopped on down to do some cleanup. All I had to battle against was a sphere, and then I snooped around for a bit. I found the Hearthfire Hall to be really fascinating. It looked different to most other sections of Dwemer ruins that I've been in. There were two other zones connected to this one. One led to a place called the Passage of Whispers, and the other led to the Hall of Winds. Deciding it was time to leave, I climbed back up to the hole in the wall and ascended back up to the plaza. Returning to Tienius in the throne room, I was surprised to see that King Helseth was standing next to him. I was pretty excited to speak with him, but first gave my report to the captain. He found the news disturbing that the fabricants were battling against the Dwemer machines. He ultimately appreciates my efforts though, and tells me it's finally time to meet with King Helseth. With that, thus ends the quest, Investigate Bombs Amschend. Approaching the king, he comes out of the gate apologizing for the assassination attempt. He says that they were misinformed and that Baranzaya vouched for me. Apparently, they have multiple sources in Vardenfell, and one of their informants suggested that I would pose as a threat to the monarchy. Again, I'm assuming this was due to my Nerevarine status. Helseth mentions that he's receiving a lot of negative attention, especially due to the unfortunate passing of King Lethin. He states that they did as much as they could for him, and that in the end, he seemed to give up on life. As a side note, I just have to say that I love this cheeky piece of dialogue. Anyways, he says there are many who want to cause civil unrest, and few who even want Helseth dead. Going further, he remarks that having others trying to kill you in the name of someone else is a feeling I could likely relate to. In fact, the palace has recently discovered a new plot against the throne. Some of his informants have apparently caught wind of a potential plot against someone in the royal family, and he asks me to look into it. I'm to meet with an orc informant at the Wing Gwar and use the secret code by asking him about his uncle's farm. Before doing so, I made a quick pit stop in the infirmary, as I've since learned that it's a free space within the city to rest without it being a crime. From there, I traveled over to God's Reach and entered inside of the tavern. Descending to the lower level, I laid eyes on the only orc present. Speaking with Bak Grosham, I asked about his uncle's farm, to which he shoots me down immediately. He says that he doesn't have an uncle, and that he doesn't even know who I am. Disappointed about what has to happen next, I equip the Amulet of Verbosity and boost my speechcraft, thinking that could help me out here. I then started to chuck a couple pieces of gold his way, and this only made him upset. Trying over again, this time I started hurling lots of money his way, and his disposition only yo-yoed between 33 and 43. It would be a lot easier to just make a charm spell, but I think because my character was loaded with so many septums, tossing a couple hundred or even a couple thousand around didn't really affect my purse a whole lot. Finally, Grosham began talking and filled me in on what he's learned. He calls the king paranoid and is getting tired of looking into conspiracies weekly, but says that this time, the plot against the royal family is true. Apparently, there's going to be an attempt made on Queen Baranzaya's life. Grosham finds this really strange though, as she doesn't have any known enemies within Mournhold. Returning back to Helseth, he says that his other sources are suggesting the same idea, and that the attack will happen tomorrow night. Helseth wants to play this out strategically though. In order to not attract too much attention, it's best to not have the royal guard involved. Instead, Helseth asks me to wait in the antechamber just outside of her room. I'm to wait behind the screens, closing all of the doors behind me. When it's time, I'm to protect the queen's life with my own. It certainly took me aback with how calm Helseth was. A plot against his mother, Queen Baranzaya, practically beloved by most in Mournhold, and he's placing his trust in someone whom he recently tried to have killed. I suppose it's smart that I'm in charge of her protection instead of his, as he knows I'm going to try my hardest at keeping her alive. Still, I feel like this news should be a little more troubling to him. This was when I decided to pay a visit to Baron Zaya's friend, Platinius Marrow. Marrow had a lot of interesting dialogue prompts to him. He certainly could have offered me a lot of fascinating insight into several different matters. Choosing to stay on task though, Marrow confirmed that something smells fishy with this whole assassination plot. He too can't think of anyone who would wish her harm. Marrow tells me to heed caution on this one, as he suggests that the king isn't above putting his own mother in harm's way, if only to test the loyalty of his subjects. This certainly only makes me more suspicious of Helseth and could explain why he was seemingly unbothered by a plot against his own mother. Making my way to Baron Zaya's chambers, I spoke with her in order to see how she felt about all of this. She didn't really say much other than she wasn't concerned by it. Closing all of the doors and forcing a wait behind the screens, I received a journal update.
Supposed to be here somewhere. He told us in the Queen Mother's chamber behind the screen.
Let's see what you're made of.
3 members of the Dark Brotherhood spotted me and began their attack. They got the better of me as I wasn't expecting them to be that tough of a fight. Trying again, I killed one off instantly using a destruction spell, and then worked on the other 2 with my spear. Their dialogue and actions were more than weird. They shut off the lights and stumbled around in the room looking for something. They then said to look behind the screens, which was exactly where the king told me to wait for them. There were too many coincidences and strange opinions for this not to be a setup from the king. I don't know if this was something meant to be looked into or not, but all of his assassins were seemingly Imperials, or at least were part of the human race. In the past, all Dark Brotherhood assassins were Dark Elves, so this was definitely something that caught my attention. Returning to the Queen, she continued to be unfazed by the plot against her. I don't know if she would be in on the plan to test my loyalty, or if she was just used as a pawn in her son's weird games. Something else I thought of is that so far, the King is the only NPC I know of who uses the services of the Dark Brotherhood. So I wonder if there's something to that as well. Running back to the throne room, King Helseth seemed unenthused about foiling the attempt against his mother, even going as far as to say that the threat was unlikely that great to begin with. He rewards me with Helseth's Collar, which fortifies sneak and security for 10 points, and fortifies speed for 5 points. With that, thus ends the quest, an assassination attempt. Before continuing onwards, I had to go and get my gear repaired. Mainly the boots of blinding speed, as they were broken, and at this point they were definitely a vital part to my build. I had forgotten what it was like to be slow in this game, and boy is it brutal. Paying a visit to Darren and dumping some gear along the way, I decided to head down into the Bazaar sewers in order to replenish all of my bars. Soon, I was ready to report back to the king. Helseth said that I had proven myself in the eyes of the throne, but have yet to prove myself to him. He has big plans for me, and it's almost time to get them moving forward. Inquiring about how I could be of further assistance, Helseth said that those in his inner circle must be strong and powerful. His personal bodyguard, Carid, is the best and most loyal fighter that he's ever seen. Helseth met Carid many years ago, when the Red Guard was apparently just a little boy, deaf and daft. After Carid's attempted robbery, the royal family decided to take him into their employ. Helseth said that he wants me to duel Carid. This is because, according to Helseth, the plans that he has set out for me involve both brawn and brain. If I'm able to defeat Carid and mark myself as the best warrior in the employ of the Royal Guard, Helseth will know I'm ready. I'm to return tomorrow for the battle. Making the mistake of wanting to get straight into it, I forced the 24-hour wait and went directly to the king. Helseth commends me for returning and drops the fact that Carid has never been bested in battle before. He says that we're able to use any weapons or spells available. Exiting the conversation, the throne room clears out and it's just me and the Red Guard. Attempting to speak with him, he says nothing back. I get the first cheap shot in with casting my most powerful destruction spell. It appears to drop his health to around half, and Carid charges in. I kited him around the room a bit, which again was a big mistake. He knocked me down a few times before I got some hits in with my spear. This was when I noticed that he had some form of health regen. His HP was already much higher than before, and every hit with my spear seemed to get healed right away. Fortunately, he didn't hit incredibly hard, but I knew this attempt was going to end in my failure. Any time spent not attacking meant my progress was getting negated. After some feeble attempts at trying to stay in the fight, Carid delivered the killing blow. I tried to leave in order to restock on some potions, but the doors were locked and Carid came rushing in. If I had the ability to cast my most powerful destruction spell twice, I knew I could win this fight. The issue was that I didn't have any more Restore Magicka potions. Restarting the fight one more time, I let off my spell and kept him busy with my spear. When ready, I popped every single one of my Fortify Magicka potions and enchantments. For some reason, I cast my less powerful destruction spell instead of the one that would have likely killed him. Fortunately, it did get him down to around 1/4 health, and I was fairly certain I could close out the fight from here. I poked and prodded with my spear, fighting for dear life against his insane health regen. With a smidgen of health left, Carid spoke up and surrendered. He called me the Greater Warrior and permitted me to speak again with the king. Doing so, Helseth says he could hardly believe that I won. On top of that, he's never heard Carid speak before. He says that I've proven myself to him and gifts me his father's ceremonial dagger, saying that we can now discuss plans for me. Taking a look at the dagger of Symmachus, it fortifies the skill of Short Blade and the attribute of Endurance for 10 points. It also has the enchantment of Reflect for 10%. With that, thus ends the quest, Helseth's Champion. Speaking again with King Helseth, I ask him what his plans are for me. He gives me a speech about how the Tribunal has a massive presence in Mournhold and how Almalexia oversees everything here. Helseth admits to not having much love for the Tribunal and wishes me to gather a little more information on them. Due to my intel provided before, the Royal Palace knows that the Fabricants aren't Dwemer in nature. They believe them to be the work of a god. Helseth believes that Almalexia knows more about these creatures than she lets on. He states that they must be creations of Sothasil, the third member of the Tribunal. The king wants me to gain the trust of the goddess, so that way I can learn more about the recent attacks. Until then, I shouldn't be spotted in the palace's inner circle so as to not draw attention on myself. Asking a little more about Sothasil, Helseth calls him a tinkerer, and that no one has seen him in centuries. The first part is new information to me, and it certainly does push him further along as a suspect. Exiting the royal palace, I returned back to the High Chapel and spoke again with the goddess. She greeted me and said that upon Phaedrus's recommendation, there's more work that I can do for her. Inquiring about it, she says that since the attacks on Mournhold, other disturbing events have occurred. Among them is the rise of a cult called the End of Times. The cult is led by a Dunmer named Enno Ramari. Enno resides somewhere here in Mournhold, yet has no permanent residence. According to Almalexia, he spreads misinformation and must be dealt with, but not killed. When asked about the End of Times cult, she says that not much is known about them, except that recently, a few of them have been found dead. 7 have been discovered in their homes. Apparently, their death was caused by some form of ingested poison. She wants me to figure out what their endgame is and ultimately get rid of them. Almalexia directs me over to Marilyn Othen in the Great Bazaar, as her brother Seville was a recent victim to the cult's games. Exiting the conversation, I made my way over to the Great Bazaar and located Marilyn. Fortunately, she didn't need any convincing. She talked right away and told me that the cult is destructive, heretical, frightening, and suicidal. More and more members are popping up over the city, and they mostly spend their time around the Winged Guar. Enno Ramari also spends his time there. Making my way over to God's Reach, I spot an NPC I've never seen before, standing just outside of the tavern. Approaching, it's Enno, the leader of the End of Times cult. He introduces himself and asks how he can help me. I inquire about the cult, and Enno says that they're a peaceful group. They're dedicated to relieving the suffering of those affected by these hard times. He speaks of how the near future holds troubles and hardships for all, and that his followers are taught the way of enlightenment. Many of them are willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater cause. Pressing further, Enno says that the cult's beliefs are rather simple. He knows that the Tribunal's power is waning. He suggests that when the three of them pass on, the next era will begin. The followers of the cult are preparing for this exact occasion. Enno says that the cult believes that the end of this era will bring many changes. Gates to Oblivion will open, and Daedra will roam the lands of Tamriel. There are some who might say that this is a good and necessary change, but the cult knows better. Enno says that the Daedric princes must not be trusted, and that they will only bring destruction and change. The only ones who can be trusted are the true ancestors, aka the Aedra, and they will offer us their protection. He then mentions that the followers perform a ritual called the Cleansing. They quote-unquote relieve themselves of their worldly burdens and troubles, passing on to the next life in order to prepare the ancestors for what's to come. While doing research for a whole separate video, I had actually come across Enno's dialogue and noticed how crazy the foreshadowing is here. I love the idea that players back in the day would have just passed on those words as crazy. Obviously, a lot of it is, but his predictions for the end of times was spot on, and it was a very clever way for Bethesda to leak some plot points for Oblivion. Returning back to Almalexia, she's insulted that the End of Times cult would even question her power. She vows to teach them a lesson and tells me that I'm going to be her agent. Since most of her power has been used on securing and tending to the city, she can't divert it to other matters. But since they mocked the power of a god, her idea involves me traveling back down to the ruins of Bom's Amshend and activating something called the Karstang's Beharn. This machine, loosely translated to Weather Witch, was used by the Dwemer in times of drought to bring rain. Since the ruins have opened up, Almalexia's suspicions of its existence have been confirmed. I'm to find this machine and activate it. It has the power to create ash storms, similar to those in which I saw on Vardenfell. In doing this for her, she suggests it will teach the heretics a lesson to not underestimate a god. She hands me an item called the Power Dwemer Cohere and says that it's needed to turn the machine on. She trusts that I will figure out the rest from there. I do find it pretty ironic that she really wants to prove her godly strength, but can only do so by using a Dwemer creation. I thought for sure that King Helseth would want to know about Almalexia's plans, but he instead shooed me away, insisting that we still couldn't be seen together. So I just made my way over to the plaza and descended into Bom's Amshend. Overlooking Hearthfire Hall, no new enemies spawned in and the way forward was cleared. I ventured into the Passage of Whispers where I encountered more Dwemer machines. The Centurion archers packed a punch with their darts, so I made a note not to let them get any cheap shots in. There were multiple entrances into other zones for this area, including one that was blocked off by some rubble. I moved along, fighting some dwarven spiders and steam centurions until finally arriving at Radek's Forge. There were a few more enemies in here, as well as multiple different passageways. I stumbled across a door that was secured by a level 100 lock. Using a spell to open it, it contained multiple chests with some pretty valuable treasures. Among them was 2 Dwemer satchel packs. I didn't know what they were used for at first, but upon getting closer to the areas blocked off by rubble, I noticed a new prompt. I was able to place the satchels on them as charges. Doing so, a countdown started and I backed away. This blasted through the rocks and opened up to the passage of the Walker. Within this zone, I came across and blasted through another passageway leading to a spot called Norenendur. This area was revealed to be Daedric in nature, and it tipped me off that I've stumbled a bit too far. Returning back to the Passage of the Walker and venturing further into it, I faced off against more Dwemer Centurions, which again proved to be pretty easy opponents. It had so many different areas cut off by fallen rocks, and it made me wonder if I had wasted the second satchel charge, as I was struggling to find more. Deciding to just continue onwards, I found a door leading to an area called the King's Walk. The King's Walk was brief and contained a few enemies. At the end of it, there was a door leading to the Skybreak Gallery. The gallery was this magnificently made area, with blue lights and a big machine at its center. Oddly enough, it reminded me a bit of Akula Khan's chamber in Dagoth Ur. Approaching the giant machine, I found a Dwemer junction box which took the powered Cohere as an energy source. This allowed me to adjust some Dwemer levers just in front of it. I got lucky in that the first one I pulled on gave me a journal update. I didn't realize that right in front of the levers, there was a panel that showed which weather effect the Karstang's Beharn would push forward. Leaving the Dwemer ruins with no trouble, I ascended back up to the plaza and experienced the dust storm firsthand. It felt exactly as it did back on Vardenfell. Something else I thought of before is that these ash storms are going to affect everything and everyone here in Mournhold. This goes beyond just punishing the cult. It punishes even those who are faithful to the Tribunal. Returning back to Almalexia, she thanks me for my efforts and says that her magic prevents anyone from being able to change the weather back. She tells me to keep quiet about what I did and assures me that her powers are a bit drained but not gone. She closes off by saying her ordinators are going to take care of the end times cult and that the ash storms will only stop when these people have learned their lesson. Looking at my journal, my character expresses their concern for the life here on Vardenfell and that these ash storms will hopefully end sooner than later. With that, thus ends the quest, A Show of Power. Speaking with Almalexia, she expresses her gratitude towards me, calling me a good and faithful servant. She remarks that no other gods have displayed dominion over the land and sky like she has. She then tells me that there's troubling news. One of her hands is missing. Her guard, Salus Valor, has abandoned his post and now roams around Mournhold spewing lies and misinformation about Almalexia. She still harbors goodwill towards him. However, he presents a threat to her cause and the Tribunal. The goddess tells me I will more than likely have to strike him down. The catch is that even the Ordinators are afraid to approach him, as he's a weapon master and war wizard. When asked further about Salus, Almalexia considers his dive into madness her fault, as she let him get too close to her. Exiting the conversation, I asked around Mournhold about where I could find the hand. Landing in God's Reach, a High Ordinator told me that Salvus was nearby. Looking a little further, I spotted the hand of the goddess and approached him. He was immediately aggressive towards me and mentioned how he used to be her favorite servant. Salvus said that it doesn't matter which of us dies, as regardless, Almalexia will be pleased. He tells me to make peace with my gods, and the battle begins. Salus fought with an ebony scimitar for close combat and some silver poison darts for ranged combat. The poison darts, also known as her darts, were highly effective against me and led to my death many times. I was better off fighting against him face to face, but his sword, also known as her scimitar, can damage fatigue and strength, as well as absorb strength and project frost damage. Too many hits with this weapon also led to my death. On top of that, Salvus's armor and spells gifted him with a lot of fortifications and abilities, the most troublesome of which was a powerful reflect spell. This would be the lead cause to most of my deaths, as pretty early on, I thought the best way for me to defeat him was through my destruction magic. I ended up dying a lot in this fight, but I eventually found the method that worked best for me. I would cast my frost spell, and if it hit, I'd distance myself from Salvus and save the game. I did this a couple of times, getting some pokes and prods in with the spear as well. Healing and regenerating my stats with what I could, I continued this process, casting some weaker spells, and finally, Salvus was defeated. His armor was nifty and powerful, making me slightly wish that I was proficient in it. Returning to Almalexia, she asked me if I had dealt with the missing hand. Telling her yes, she expresses her sorrows for Salvus. In the end though, because I served her gracefully, she grants me the choice of a new blessing. The options are for fortification in all armor types, resistance against paralysis, or a fortification for health. Choosing the last one, she tells me to continue with my faith, thus ending the quest, The Missing Hand. Speaking again with Almalexia, she welcomed me back and said it was time that we talked of greater things. Since proving myself to her on multiple occasions, she's come to truly recognize me as the Nerevarine, and says that at long last, her Nerevar has returned. Almalexia remarks that the time has finally come for me to reclaim my station, and that together, her and I can cast out the Imperials. Inquiring further, she retells the stories of old, how the Chimer and Dwemer were at odds, and that it took the invasion of the Nords for them to combine forces. She tells me that her and Nerevar were actually married. On the day of their wedding, The dwarf king Dumak gifted them the blades of Hope's Fire and True Flame. Almalexia tells me that she has kept her sword, Hope's Fire, but Nerevar's has been missing since the battle at Red Mountain. True Flame was shattered into pieces. However, Almalexia has one of them on her, and senses that the others are nearby. She tasks me with finding all of them and having them reforged. She tips me off by saying that the craftsmen of Mournhold could likely reforge it, and I should seek out those who have an affinity for ancient weaponry. Exiting the temple, I decided to go to Platinius Marrow for some knowledge. Marrow tells me that he doesn't have much information, but gives me the names of those who might. He calls out the Queen Mother Baranzaya, as well as Torasa Aram, the curator of the museum. Heading to the royal palace first, Baranzaya opens up by commenting on the fact that I defeated Karad in battle. Exploring that conversation, she tells me that since he actually spoke with me, he might be able to help me find a missing piece of the blade. The queen recognizes my Nerevarine status and further suggests that the blade Karad used against me in battle might pique my interest. Exiting the conversation and going over to the throne room, Karad speaks to me and asks how he can be of assistance. Inquiring about the pieces of the blade, the Redguard tells me that his father gave him this weapon as a child. He was told that the day someone defeated him in battle was the day the rightful owner came to claim that sword. He hands the odd Dwemer weapon over and I swing it around a bit. It's a nice feeling blade, but not really one that I've had the pleasure to test out before. Moving along, the next person I make way for is Terasa in the Museum of God's Reach. Asking about the pieces, she tells me that she hasn't seen any obvious fragments, but she does have a piece originating from the same time period. It's apparently a Dwemer shield, although its working and craftsmanship doesn't really make sense. Terasa says she's willing to part with it in exchange for a form of compensation. She says that if I'm willing to donate some rare and unique items to the museum, she's more than happy to hand over the shield. The only two that I'm prompted to give away are the Dagger of Symmachus and the Boots of Blinding Speed. There was no way I was handing the boots over, so I had to find a second item for her. After doing some digging, an easy one for me to obtain was the Bow of Shadows, back on the island of Vardenfell. I made my way to Venom Ancestral Tomb, took out all of the enemies inside, and secured the artifact. Returning to Terasa, I donated the dagger and bow, which, to be honest, was hard to do as combined, both would have netted me over 30,000 gold if I had chosen to sell them instead. Regardless, after doing so, she gifted me the Dwemer battle shield, and remarked at how a smith could fix its loose spike. Exiting the conversation and going to the craftsman hall, I presented the battle shield to Yagak Grogluk, and he immediately spotted something. The spike wasn't supposed to be a part of the shield at all. He separates the two and comments on how unique the spike is, calling it Dwemer in origin, but unlike anything he's ever seen before. I asked him if he could forge the blade of Nerevar, and he responded by saying that when he's done, it will be the finest blade I've ever seen. He tells me to return in 2 days' time. Forcing a 48-hour wait, Yagak hands me the blade back and mentions that he isn't sure why it's not ablaze. He tells me to talk to a Dwemer and remarks that I can probably find some writings on the effect down in Baum's Amshend. Yagak knows that none of them are left alive, but he specifically calls out a Dwemer mystic named Radek Strungthums. If I were to bring back his writings to the orc, he'll see what he can do for me. The True Flame blade looks amazing and has some pretty good stats. It's definitely a blade that I love to use, and again, makes me want to start training with longswords. Making my way over to Plaza Brindisi-Doram and descending into Baum's Amshend, I journeyed through the passageways, fighting off Dwemer centurions, until I arrived at Radek's forge. Wandering into the small study, I saw the apparition of a Dwemer wandering back and forth. Approaching, it was the ghost of Radek. He tells me to leave him alone and that I should let an old spirit haunt. I tell him I want to speak with a Dwemer mystic, and he laughs in my face. He was never one to begin with, just a soldier who made weapons. Radek does ask me about my blade though, questioning if I want to add fire to it. I tell him yes, and he says that that's a rather easy alteration to make. The only ingredient I need to procure is pyroil tar. He tells me that it can be found deep within the Daedric ruins of Noren and Dur, located below Baum's Amshend. Radek warns me though that I will likely run into trouble at this ruin. It's old, dangerous, and questionable as to what lurks within it. Exiting the conversation, I crawled through the dark hole leading to Noren and Dur and traveled to a zone called the Teeth That Gnash. This area contained multiple enemies, including Storm Atronachs and Bone Lords. Taking them out, I ascended some stairs and fought against 2 Dremora. Just beyond them was a door leading to the zone called Citadel of Mindrur. Radek specifically mentioned that this was the area in which I was likely to find the Pyroil Tar. Inside, I spotted a few enemies, such as Golden Saints and more Dremora. Getting in closer, I aggroed a few onto me, one of them being the Dremora Lord, Cash Tidrur. This Daedroth certainly had a good bit of health, and I was careful not to let it get in close. I swam through the waters, keeping it at bay and casting some spells, until finally Tidrur was defeated. Quickly looting the tar, I made my way out of the ruin, avoiding any further unnecessary confrontations. Returning back to Radek, I handed the substance over to him and he altered my sword. He wished me luck and sent me on my way. True Flame now had a wicked flame effect attached to it and had a fire enchantment of 30 points for 1 second. Now, this was a blade I really wish I could have used. Unfortunately, my long blade skill was poor, so there really wasn't much of a point in using it. Leaving Bom Zomshend, I ran back along to Almalexia in the temple, thus ending the quest, the Blade of Nerevar. Entering inside of the High Chapel and speaking with Almalexia, she asks me if I was able to reforge the blade. I told her yes, and she was ecstatic. Almalexia said there was but one more task that needed to be done, and it pains her to even think about it. She reminisces of her glory days with Sothasil, the camaraderie the two of them shared, as well as their achievements together. At the end of it though, she expresses her belief that the Tinkerer has gone mad. Inquiring further, Almalexia remarks that he once held a special spot within the Tribunal, similar to how both her and Vivek rule over different sections of Morrowind. He eventually grew tired of mortals and locked himself away within Clockwork City, his own personal domain. The city itself is complex, ever-changing, and full of puzzles. She draws parallels between it and its creator, both tainted by madness. Almalexia reveals that she suspected him to be a frequent visitor of the Shivering Isles. Upon each return, he would delve further into insanity. He wishes harm upon the rest of the Tribunal, and Almalexia knows what must be done with him. She confirms the king's suspicions, that Sothasil was the one to release the Fabricants upon the city, and that it's finally time he be stopped. She says it's unlikely he can be reasoned with, and that death might be the only solution. The True Flame Blade has the ability to kill a god, and she wraps up by asking me if I'm ready to get sent over to Clockwork City. Before doing so, I quickly stocked up on health and magicka potions, buying out a whole lot of them from the magic shop. Gear repaired and potions in inventory, I got teleported over to Sothasil's domain. The first zone was called the Outer Flooded Halls. It took me a while to find the switch located in the first room, and after activating it, I made my way through various traps and passageways until finally stumbling upon a door leading into the Inner Flooded Halls. This area was similar in aesthetics to the Outer Halls. Here, I ended up coming across some verminous fabricants. I didn't really get a good feel for their overall toughness when they were attacking Mournhold. However, I see now that they can be pretty strong and hit for some good damage. After maneuvering through more traps and rooms, I found myself outside of the Hall of Delirium. The look of this area was completely different to the last two. These were tighter halls and darker corridors. Facing off against more enemies and venturing into dead ends, I entered inside of the Central Gearworks. So far, I didn't really have any problems fighting against the Fabricants. At most, I'd be battling 2 at a time, and often, one of them would get stuck behind the other. My spear was able to keep me at a safe distance from their attacks as well. It was also easy enough for me to wander back into a previous zone and rest until healed if need be. From the Gearworks, I made my way into the Hall of Theuda. This area was where things started to pick up. Hulking Fabricants were introduced to the fight, and they were certainly a tougher force to be reckoned with. They hit just as hard, if not harder, than the verminous ones, and they had a lot more health. The Hall of Theuda wasn't very complex though, and soon I arrived at the Dome of Cassia. The dome was a really interesting area. It contained 3 enemies on the ground level. The catch, however, is that there was a saw blade attached to a mechanical arm spinning around the top section. It moved at incredible speeds and results in instant death for me if it makes contact. After defeating the enemies, I tried to outrun the blade a couple of times, but it didn't work. This was when I decided to just use a leaping spell, and it actually worked quite well. The next zone was called the Dome of Serlin, and this area was the most confusing one for me. It was a small room with a contraption at its center. On the right side, it contained 2 switches, and inside of the contraption, through a pair of sealed doors, was the way into the next zone. The kicker is that the switches appear to work in mysterious ways, at least at first. The right lever trips the door on the inside, and the left lever trips the door on the outside, yet they can't be activated at the same time. Fiddling around with it, verminous fabricants started to come out of the small chamber, and at one point, it seemed as though the switches were going through some sort of cycle. After much trial and error, the correct sequence involves tripping the outer door, and at the correct moment, tripping the inner door. Rushing inside, I found myself in the Hall of Salemu. Back to some sort of straightforward thinking, I dueled 2 hulking fabricants at once, which was a challenge in its own right. My fatigue wasn't always full, and my spear wasn't in the best condition, so these fights were quite lengthy and tiresome. Soon, I arrived in a new area called the Dome of Udok. This zone, similar to the Dome of Serlin, had another puzzle to it. After taking out the fabricant, I surveyed the room. There was a pit of some sort of substance in its depths. On the small catwalk by the entrance, there was a lever, and trying to pull it, the game told me I wasn't strong enough. Trying to play smart, I attempted to run and leap on the small platform connecting to the door. Doing so, I looked for a way into the next zone. Peeking into every crack and crevice, attacking it from all angles, I just couldn't locate a way through. I then went into my inventory and discovered a few different ways to buff up my strength. Boosting it to beyond 100, I tried the lever again, and this time, a bridge appeared. Taking it to the other side, I entered into the Hall of Maletho. The hall contained a few more fabricants, both hulking and verminous. Methodically making my way through the rooms and halls, slaying anything in my way, I arrived at some doors leading to the Dome of the Imperfect. Inside, I laid eyes on 2 massive Dwemer machines, both taking the forms of some kind of centurion. Getting in close, steam started to pour out of the one on the right, and it began to move. It charged in at me, stomping and thrashing around. It had melee moves of ground pounds and kicks, as well as a ranged spell attack. Its close combat attacks weren't too difficult for me to dodge, and were my preferred movesets to go up against. I poked and prodded it with my spear, strafing around the room and staying on my toes. When possible, I cast my flame spell on it, taking down chunks of its health. It was a hard-fought battle, and honestly, it proved to be a pretty tough opponent. Soon, I landed the finishing blow on the Imperfect and went inside of the Dome of Sotha-Sil. The scene was quite disturbing. At the center of the room, attached via wires to some sort of contraption, was the disfigured, broken, dismembered, lifeless corpse of Sotha-Sil. His body strung up by wires, swiveling around. His eyes were soulless and his mouth lay agape. Approaching the horror show and interacting with it, the game tells me that he's dead, and that someone else got to him before me. Unsure of where to go from here, I tried to exit the room.
Nerevarine. Here it ends. This clockwork city was to be your death. You were to be my greatest martyr, the heroic Nerevarine, sacrificing all to protect Morrowind from the mad Sotha-Sil. But you live. You live. Fear not. I will tell the tale myself when this is done. I will tell my people how with your dying breath you proclaimed your devotion to me, the one true God. Your death will end this prophecy and unite my people again under one God, one faith, one rule by my divine law. The puppet king will lay down his arms and bow to my will. Those who do not yield will be destroyed. The mazed band has allowed me to travel to this place. Here I slew Sotha-Sil. Here I summoned the fabricants to attack Mournhold. I will be the savior of my people. I alone will be their salvation. None may stand in my way. Not you, And certainly not Vivek. He is a poet, a fool. I will deal with him when I have finished with you. And Sotha Sil. He always thought himself our better, shunning us, locking himself in his hole. He spoke not a word as he died, not a whisper. Even in death he mocked me with his silence. But I think you will scream, mortal. For now you face the one true God.
Almalexia, after revealing her plans and recounting the events truthfully, comes in for the attack. She was the hardest opponent that I've had to face yet. She fought with Hope's Fire in close quarters, and with any space created, she would let off a powerful spell that had an equally alarming blast radius. I died countless times to her. Often there would be no rhyme or reason when it came to her switching attacks. I'd be right in front of her, and she'd hit me point blank with her destruction spell. The magic was much harder to deal with than Hope's Fire. I could counter the distance with my spear, but when she cast her spell, it didn't matter where I was in the room, as part of it was going to hit me no matter what. My time spent dueling her was lengthy. It even got to the point where I was second guessing my abilities, if I should have even progressed this far to begin with. Most hopes seemed lost, that was, until I learned of my secret weapon. I realized that I could exit the dome of Sotha Sil and go back into the dome of the Imperfect. Doing so, it reset Almalexia's attack animations. So, after much trial and error, my technique going forward involved poking her with my spear or casting destruction spells, then quickly leaving before she could let off an attack. This tedious cycle continued for quite some time until she permanently switched up her attack set. She stuck with only using Hope's Fire, and it changed the game a bit. I was able to stick around longer, repeatedly striking her with my spear. When she knocked me down, I would pop a health and magicka potion, cast a destruction spell, and leave the zone. Eventually, her health got really low, and I was confident in my ability to close out the fight. I leapt in with my spear, hitting her over and over again. Pressing the attack, hoping she wouldn't catch me off guard, I soon had a huge sigh of relief, as Almalexia was defeated. I looted Hope's Fire and Berelzar's mazed band from her body. Using the ring, it brought me back to Mournhold. Exiting the temple, the ash storms were gone, and I was visited by a familiar face.
You have done well, mortal. The death of Almalexia is a boon for all of Morrowind, though it may take time for this to be understood. She would have betrayed the Dhamma as surely as she had betrayed all those whom she loved. This was her curse and her undoing. Weep not for Sotha Sil. He shed his mortality long ago, and I am certain his death was no small relief to him. These gods lived with the burden of a power no mortal was meant to possess. Your work in Morrowind is not finished, Nerevarine. Vivek still lives, but I believe his time grows short. Protect my people. Defend these lands. The skies of Mournhold are clear once again. Let these people suffer no longer. Now go, mortal. Embrace your destiny and go with my blessing.
Azura's visitation marks the end for the Tribunal questline. Before wrapping things up though, I wanted to speak with two more NPCs. The first was King Helseth. Finally, he opened up with some different dialogue. He tells me that he's heard a great deal of rumors surrounding Almalexia, myself, and the rest of the Tribunal. He asks if I learned anything from the attacks. I fill him in on all the details, and he's absolutely astounded. He can't believe the Fabricants were Almalexia's doing, and that both her and Sotha Sil are dead. Helseth believes my tale, but says that others are less likely to. As a piece of his gratitude, the king rewards me with a set of Royal Guard armor. The last person I wanted to speak with was Vivek. When asked about Almalexia, I'm prompted to tell him about the death of both her and Sotha Sil. Doing so, Vivek is extremely saddened by the news. He predicted that Almalexia would likely lash out, and expected himself to be targeted before Sotha Sil. He reflects on his own mortality, and even suggests that one day his death may come at my hands. Vivek knew that these events would likely occur, and that one by one the Tribunal would fade. Nevertheless, these were his oldest companions, and now they're both gone. King Helseth was correct in his assumptions that most of the citizens wouldn't believe my story. I tried telling Platinius different versions of it, and each time he scoffed and dismissed me. This truly makes my journey feel more isolated and lonesome. With that, thus ends the quest, the Mad God, and furthermore, that concludes the main questline for the Tribunal expansion featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. The Tribunal was a lot of fun to get to play through. I really enjoyed the city of Mournhold, its aesthetics, NPCs, unique establishments, questlines, etc. A key point for the main game's storyline was the Tribunal itself, and I was really happy to see the other members get some time in the limelight. Almalexia's character was intriguing and amusing to interact with. Peeling back the curtains into her slow downward spiral felt like a fantastic way to build up the story. On top of that, King Helseth and the monarchy also helped in shedding more information regarding the current climate of Mournhold. It was nice to speak with Baron Zaya, Phaedrus, Tienius, Platinius, and Helseth. Their unique viewpoints and knowledge of the world were pretty fascinating. If anything, I wish that Helseth played a bigger role in the endgame phase. There's a lot of built-up tension between the monarchy and the temple. Not to mention, it feels like there are still a lot of unanswered questions surrounding King Helseth. I'm unsure if his lore gets touched upon anymore in the game, or if Bethesda just neglected to finish off a paranoid lying usurper king storyline. This might be an answer I find out soon, or never at all. The low parts for me during this questline was all of the sewer crawling. I found the sewers themselves to be uninteresting and lengthy, but the unique zones that came after them made up for it. The ruins of Bam Amshend and the Dwemer secrets within were also really neat to get to go through. I'll give Bethesda some personal credit, as I thought the way they handled not wanting to expand beyond Mournhold was clever. Old sewer systems, ruins, and hidden caves. Like I said, some of it got a little old in the end, but other parts felt new and innovative. Clockwork City also felt like an interesting place. I liked how it included a mixture of both fighting and problem solving. The boss fights in this questline felt pretty difficult, but I think that was a personal skill issue. Highlight quests were Hunt the Dark Brotherhood, the Royal Palace optional quests, an attack on Mournhold, an assassination attempt, a show of power, the Blade of Nerevar, and the Mad God. I really enjoyed getting to play through the Tribunal expansion for the first time, and I'm happy I got to experience it with all of you. Until next time, keep on adventuring.